Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Covenant House Academy Virtual Town Hall. I am Terry George, I'm the superintendent, and I'm the not great looking guy on the screen right now. We're going to go over several items that are very important for the start of the school year tonight. Hopefully we will answer most of your questions in that presentation, but if not, there will be a chance to enter your questions and we will try to get to them at the end of this slideshow. If you go to the details for the event, you will see a link. You can submit your question there and I will get it and try to respond before we say goodnight today. As we all know, this has been a terrible time, not only in our country and in our state, but certainly in the city of Detroit. Almost all of us have lost people that we know. If we've been lucky enough not to lose anyone, we know people that have been hospitalized, that have been sick, people that have lost their jobs. We know that among our students, we've had students that have lost family members. We have students that have lost siblings. We have students that have been involved in serious car accidents. We've lost 2 former students that way. It's been very, very difficult. And in addition to those physical losses, there's the trauma that comes with losing good friends and family members, the trauma that comes with being out without work and being cooped up at home and unable to go out. We have had a few good moments. The picture you see in the top right corner is when my neighbor, Mr. Donald, was released from the hospital after 72 days. We did a car parade for him through the neighborhood. We were so happy. This was back in April when we thought if you got COVID, there really wasn't much coming back. So that was a big deal. We'll talk more about that later. And in addition to all the economic and physical consequences for our families and especially our students, there's been an academic cost as well. Our rate of course completion went down dramatically. We had some students that did very well. They were able to stay on track. They were able to complete their classes and they really did a great job, but they were the smaller number of students. We had a lot of other students who struggled with the technology. They had a hard time getting a schedule into a routine schedule. Sometimes it was hard to study because there were a lot of people all trapped at home at the same time. So we know that there's been a very high cost to the shutdown. That's why we've been working really hard this spring and summer to prepare for the reopening of school, if you will, for the coming year. We just know how important that is for all of our students to continue on in terms of earning their high school diploma. So tonight we're going to talk about a few of the options for how our students can do that and the changes we've made to try to make it a safe and suitable environment for everybody. Now, as you will hear me say several times tonight, we are really going into very uncertain times. We don't know from week to week or from day to day what the health situation will be. So it's really important that we have your current phone number, your current email, and your current address. Even if you think we've got the correct ones, contact the school and let them know. We need to be able to reach students and parents just because the news and the situation may change rapidly and we want to let everybody know as soon as possible. As you all know, it's been a very, very trying time. The pandemic hit Michigan very hard, especially Detroit. Certainly New York City probably gets the unfortunate prize for the worst number of cases, but Detroit was right up there in the spring. And if you look at the graph in front of you, you'll see these dark blue bars are the number of new cases confirmed every day since the pandemic began. The light blue at the top, those are probable cases, but both of them follow the same pattern. If you look at March, when we had just 1 or 2, it very rapidly rose to the point where we were identifying more than 1,400 new cases a day in Michigan. That's when we shut down. And as we look at April and May, things got better on average. They got to a pretty nice point in early June, but of course that's when Memorial Day came, the weather got nice, and we loosened restrictions. So statewide, the number of cases have gone up over the summer. Not as bad as in April, but they have definitely gone up statewide. The one good piece of news is that in Detroit, we have not followed that pattern. We had, of course, terrible numbers, terrible losses in March and April and May. If you look, we were getting as many as 400 or 500, 350 new cases a day just in the city of Detroit in early April. But you'll notice that with the restrictions, those numbers went way down. And if we look in June, we were doing really well, maybe 20 new cases a day for the whole city. They've come up just a little bit in the summertime, but not much. Nothing like the rest of the state. In fact, Macomb County is seeing more new cases per day than the city of Detroit is. So while I still worry about those cases, and we still have to be very vigilant and very concerned, it's definitely in Detroit a very different story than it was in April, and it's also a very different story than it is in other parts of the state. Those parts of the state didn't have the big peak in April that we did, but now they're getting a larger number of cases. Another way to measure the impact, of course, is more gruesome and certainly sadder, and that's the number of fatalities from COVID. And if you look in April, you'll see that it was really tragic. We were averaging about 40 deaths per day of Detroit residents. Just horrible. And again, that speaks to the trauma and the loss that I think we all feel to varying degrees. The number of fatalities started to go down in May and in June, and I think that happened for two reasons. One, the restrictions were taking into effect, so the number of cases went down, but also when the cases went down, the hospitals weren't as overwhelmed, and of course the doctors and nurses have figured out how to treat COVID better than they did in April when it was still very much unknown. I think the most encouraging thing, if we look at July and August, is that the number of fatalities is always below 10 a day. It's usually 1 or 2, and on many days when you don't see anything, that means we didn't lose anybody. There were no deaths related to COVID. Now, of course, we want to see this get to the point where there are no red bars at all. But I think it's safe to say that in Detroit, at least, we're getting much, much better at not only eliminating cases, preventing cases, but also how we treat the cases so that it's not is likely to lead to a fatality. Another good sign that we can consider is the positivity rate of testing. So the top bar that you can see, this dark sort of green number, that's the number of negative tests in a day. The little red bar, that's the number of positive tests. So on an average day in Detroit, we're testing about 1,600 or 1,700 people per day. And if you look at the graph below, you can see at this point, roughly 2.2% of those tests are coming back positive. That is wonderful news. Most of the experts are saying that if you can keep the positivity rate under 5%, you have a community has a pretty good handle on the coronavirus. So a couple weeks ago, we were at about 3 or 3.9%. That number has continued to go down, and you'll see that we're doing more and more testing. So that's a very encouraging sign. We'd like to get that below 1%. That would be marvelous. But if we can keep it at 2.5% or below, I think the city is doing very well. I think, as I said, in March and April, very few things were known about COVID. We've learned a lot since then. There's still plenty we don't know, but we have learned a lot about what we need to contain the virus and keep from spreading it. I think the top 3 things that we've all heard are, number 1, we have to wear masks when we're around other people. The number 1 source of transmission seems to be droplets that come out of our mouth when we sing or shout or talk or sneeze or cough. And wearing a mask over our nose and our mouth is an enormous help. You may have heard several people say that if we could just get everybody to wear masks, we could lick this pandemic in about 2 months. And I don't know if that's true, but I really believe wearing masks makes a huge difference. Excuse me. Along with that, it's important that we maintain distance from everybody outside of our immediate family. We'll talk about how we plan to do that in the school, but it's really important to try to stay at least 6 feet away from everybody else. Especially if you're inside an enclosed space. If you're in a room, it's really critical because the initial studies coming out show that the closer you are to somebody that's infected, the more likely you are to be infected as well. Conversely, the further away you are, the more protected you are. The third big item is frequent hand washing and good hygiene. And not just running your hands under the water, but soap and water for a solid 20 seconds. That's because we all instinctively touch our face, we touch our nose, our mouth, our eyes, and those are the entry points where the virus can get in. So if we keep our hands clean, we're less likely to transmit the virus from our hand to the mouth or the nose or the eyes. Over the past few weeks, a couple other things have come out that are really important. Probably the number one item that's come out in the research is the importance of good ventilation, good airflow. And that, I think, contributes to our improved record in Detroit. We can be outside, we can open the windows, we can get the air circulating in our houses. And if we do that, the virus tends to flow out the window and dissipate. That is really critical, and it's key to our plans for reopening. Another key is that we have to be responsible enough to stay home when we might be sick. If we're definitely sick, there's no question. But even if we think we might be sick, if we wake up with any of the symptoms that might be related to COVID, even if we're not sure, we should stay home. That's very hard for me as a former truancy officer. I used to tell kids, oh, it's just a sniffle, go on to school. That's not the case anymore. If we think we've got a symptom, we need to stay home a day or two to make sure that it's not the coronavirus. And the last thing, and this is something we can't do yet, but we should all be able to do in about 2 months, is to get the flu shot. Public health experts are really worried about what will happen when the normal flu comes around in November or December and the coronavirus is still there. It will overload hospitals if we don't have them under control, and it will make our lives difficult because there are so many similarities in terms of symptoms. So they've ordered several times more influenza vaccines than they normally do. I never get the flu shot, but this year I will, and I encourage all of you to do the same. Anybody that's old enough should get the flu shot. It will help you individually, but it will also help all our friends and neighbors because it will lower the stress on our healthcare system. And speaking of shots and COVID, I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID testing. You saw in the graph earlier that in Detroit, at least, we're testing more than 1,500 people a day, and that's wonderful because that is a really, really good percentage. That means in a week, we're getting almost 10% of the city population tested. Or I'm sorry, almost 1% of the city population tested, which is not where we want to be, but it's actually a pretty good number. And we're moving along, and that's how they can track when the surge comes back up, when there's a hot spot. But speaking of testing, as an organization, we've made the decision that all our staff members will be tested for COVID between now and the time students come back. We're also working with public health officials to see if we can have testing available for students and families at our school buildings. It will be optional, but we think that that would be a service that could be very helpful. Especially, you may have heard there are some easier tests coming out. If we can get those, it would be very easy to put everybody's mind at rest by getting a quick and simple COVID test. We're also going to be encouraging our staff to test regularly, and we encourage all of you to do the same. The state has a list of testing sites where you can go for free. I know of 3 in the Detroit area, and I know there are a few more. Wayne County Community College District on Fort Street is offering free testing. You can get testing from the city of Detroit at the state fairgrounds. I did that back in May, and that's also free and very good. And then even at the Walgreens in Northwest Detroit at Grand River and Greenfield, I've gone there to be tested twice. Very quick, very easy to do. And we'll have access to a full list of sites, but those are just 3 that I know are available and very effective and very efficient. As we go into the year, though, even though the circumstances in Detroit are looking better, we know that things can change, and we also know that every family's circumstances are different. And so we are prepared to give every family 2 learning options for the new school year. One of them is that students can come back in person, the way we've done before. We've made a lot of changes to make that a much safer proposition, or students can work virtually. What I'd like to do is walk through some of the skeleton, some of the outline for both of those plans so that you can make the decision that's best for you as we go forward this year. So let's first of all talk about in-person school. Normally, we would start school in person in August. As many of you know, we've had students working remotely here in the month of August. We wanted to wait until we had all our safety equipment in place. We've now ordered all of it. We're waiting for it to come in, and we will install it over the next 3 weeks. So at Central Campus and Southwest Campus, we will be ready to receive students on September 8th, which is the day after Labor Day. At the East Campus, in addition to dealing with COVID, we are opening our beautiful new campus on Gratiot near I-94. The contractors need just a little bit more time, so those students will stay remote until the week of September 15. I want to walk you through some of the key procedures for the day, but each school will have an orientation and maybe even some videos to help students and parents understand all the details of our new operating procedures. But I want to hit the highlights tonight. First of all, it will start at the front door. Each family, or each student I should say, will take a health survey, a wellness check they call it, preferably on their phone, and we will give students the link to that on their first day at school. If they don't have a cell phone, then they can take it verbally. We actually encourage the students to take it before they leave the house. And if it says that they're okay to come to school, it will show a green sign on their phone, and then they're good to go. But if it flashes a red sign, that means they should stay home and call the school and let us know that they're staying home. When they come to the school, they'll hold up their phone and they'll show it to a staff member before they walk in the building. It will be green and it will say, okay, I'm ready to come in. We will then take their temperature without touching them. We'll take their temperature from about 3 feet away to make sure that they don't have a fever greater than 100 degrees. If they do have a fever, we'll stop them and we'll contact you and they will go home. Also, students need to wear a mask over their nose and their mouth when they come into the building and at all times. If they don't have a mask, we will have a mask available for them. When they enter the building, they will then go straight to their classroom, their guided study classroom. When they get to the classroom, things are going to look a little different this year. Will actually look more like an elementary school in some ways than our usual format where students rotate classes. One of the keys to limiting and minimizing the transmission is that we want our students and our staff to come in contact with as few people as possible. So rather than walking through the halls and coming close to 90 other people, everybody's going to work in one room for the day. So students will report to that room. That will be their guided study. They'll work on their classes. They'll have 2 classes at a time. They can work all on 1 class or they can work on 2 for half of the day. We'll also have about a half hour or 40 minutes of what we call engagement activities. You might call them social emotional learning. You might call them homeroom activities. You might call them discussions. And each term will have a different theme. We're starting off with the theme of belonging or community because we've all been so hard pressed to find community over these past 6 months. We felt that was a great place to start. As I said, students will wear masks in the room, as will teachers. One of the nice things about having a school with a small class size like ours is that we had room. We basically are shutting down every other computer station. So all of our students will be separated by 6 feet in every classroom. We had to do some rearranging, but we were really happy we were able to make that happen. Especially in September and October, we will have the windows open whenever possible, almost always, and we're purchasing fans to speed up the ventilation of the air in those rooms. In addition, in each classroom, we have ordered HEPA air filters. HEPA are high quality filters that will filter out even a molecule or a cell, I should say, as small as the coronavirus 99.7% of the time. In addition to that, for each of the main heating and cooling systems, depending on how old it is, we're either adding a HEPA filter in the main HVAC system or we're adding an ultraviolet light that also kills a lot of the virus cells as they go through the ductwork. So we're taking all kinds of measures to make sure that that air is as pure as humanly possible. When teachers help students, they may do it in one of three ways. They might work remotely from their desk at the computer, so the student will actually be able to share screens with them from their station. Sometimes if that doesn't work, they might go up to the board and the teacher and student can stand several feet apart but work at a screen at the board. And then lastly, if needed, we may have some desks or tables set up where students can sit several feet away from a teacher, and there will be an acrylic shield, or what we would call a sneeze guard, between them to block those droplets we talked about. We will not have the normal semesters that we normally do. We'll have 5 terms. Each term will be about 7 weeks, and the goal is for each student to complete 2 classes per term. We would love it if students completed more than 2, and we think if somebody's working diligently, they might be able to finish 3 or even 4 in a term. So that 7 weeks is about 34 or 35 school days. We think that's doable, and at the end of the year, anybody who does that will be moved to the next grade very easily, and that will keep them on path toward graduation. As I said, our hope is that students will knock out 3 or 4 every term and even have the potential of jumping a grade in 1 year. We would love to see that. As I mentioned, it's been a difficult time for almost all of us, but for certainly some families, it's just been a horrific time. So we've made some changes to make sure that we have some supports in place for the students that are still grappling with all the emotions that have come with these past 6 months. So one change that we made just recently is that we added a social worker. So now each school in the district will have a full-time social worker. So they will now have the time to work with any student that needs it. Also, the guided study teachers will be checking in, not just on academics, but also on overall to see how the kids are doing. And they'll do that multiple times in a week. They'll really be serving not just as academic teachers, but as mentors and coaches for the students. And they'll refer them to social workers if they think there's a need for something more. In the spring, as we started to hear about students that were losing family members, we realized that this is a traumatizing time for everybody. So all of our staff members went through training with Star Commonwealth on how to be more supportive and more understanding when working with students that have undergone trauma. Several of our staff members actually went on then to get additional training in that area. So we're really hoping that we can be there for the kids that need more than just the academics. And parents, if you're on the call, I would say, if you feel your son or daughter needs more, please let us know. Teenagers don't always let us know when they could use an extra person to talk to, so we hope that they will open up, but we also hope that you will let us know if we can help in any way in that regard. We should say that there are some expectations that will be very, very important as we start the year, and they're all intended to keep us as safe as possible. Number 1, students and staff will wear masks at all time over their nose and their mouth, except when they're eating lunch. Students will stay at their station in the classroom. They can't get up and walk around and talk to their friends that way. We'll find other ways to communicate. And in talking about the ways that the coronavirus is transmitted, certain things just cannot be anymore. We can't have physical contact. That means no pushing, no shoving, but it also means no hugging, which will be hard for a lot of us. That's part of our culture and how we are. No shouting. The more we shout, the more we sing, the greater the distance those droplets go. You may have heard about a church that held choir practice, and one of the singers in the choir was sick, and that singer infected 36 other people because they were practicing for about 2 hours with no covering on their faces. And certainly no threatening or agitating or instigating of fights. Anything like that leads to a very unsafe situation at any time, but in the era of coronavirus, it's really, really dangerous. So we're going to have a no tolerance policy on all those things. I think what it really comes down to, though, is everybody has to follow the rules and the instructions. These rules are not here to make anybody's life difficult. They're to protect life and keep everybody safe. And because of that, if a student chooses not to comply with those expectations, there's really only one answer. They will have to leave. And if that continues to happen, they will have to leave permanently or go virtual. There's just no room to negotiate when it comes to the safety of our staff and students. We owe it to all of you, whether it's students, parents, or staff, to say that we care about you enough that we are going to enforce these rules, and everybody who walks into our building should care about everybody else in the building enough to follow those rules. Plain and simple. We don't mean to be unkind. We don't mean to be mean. We mean to be protective of everybody who walks into our buildings, because the bottom line is that safety is the number one thing we owe to our students, parents, and staff. More than anything else, we have to do everything in our power to keep everyone safe. Along with those expectations, there are some different procedures that we will follow. I mentioned that students will stay at their station in the classroom. In addition, we will only have one student at a time go to the restroom. We'll have somebody in the hallway that's sort of managing traffic to be sure. We will cover our water fountains in the hallway, but we will have water available in the classrooms. Early dismissal will be permitted. It's a long day to be in one room. If somebody just can't make it the whole day, or if they need to leave early for work, with parent consent, we'll call you, or you can call us. We will release students early. When we do get to the end of the day and dismiss, we'll dismiss in phases or in waves. So we'll dismiss one classroom at a time, and probably even one student at a time, because we don't want people bunching up in the hallway. And for the same reasons, we'll have staggered lunch. Students will eat their lunches in the classroom, and we are working on a takeout option for students to bring home if they need to leave early or if they're not comfortable eating in the classroom. We'll have more again on the first day of school for that, but we've been working with our food company, and they've been very cooperative and have offered us a lot of great options for that. In addition, each room will have a sanitizer station at the front door, so whenever a student or adult walks in or walks out, we expect them to squirt a little sanitizer on their hand, rub their hands together, and just make sure that that hand is clean. As I mentioned, one student at a time in the bathroom. When it comes to parent-student meetings, we'll try to do that remotely as much as possible for everybody's safety. If it has to be in person, we'll do it in a room with a protective sneeze guard and an air filter. We will strictly limit visitors coming into the building. Pretty much it will only be the people that absolutely need to come inside will be permitted to be there, and we will have strict limitations on the hallway traffic for everybody. We've also added some extra cleaning procedures. Cleaning now will happen 4 times a day in high-use areas. In addition to that, we have ultraviolet wands that the custodians will use to give a second layer of protection and cleaning to our hard surfaces and tables. Research has shown that ultraviolet lights can kill a high percentage of any viral bacteria. And then once per week, we'll do a special fogger where the room is closed and a mist of disinfectant and antimicrobial disinfectant will be sprayed, and then that's allowed to settle on the surfaces and kill the virus. And then each day, each student will be given a disinfectant wipe to wipe down their station only. They won't wipe down anybody else's, just their own. Of course, we hope that we will never ever have a COVID case, but we also know that that's a distinct possibility. If we suspect somebody has COVID, or if we get word that somebody has been confirmed to have a COVID case, we will immediately go into a protocol for several things. Number one, we will contact that family and ask them to come get that student immediately. If there's a delay in that, the student will wait in an isolation room with nobody else, where they will be safe and everybody else will be kept safer until somebody can come pick them up. Again, that's why we want people to check before they leave home, because we don't want people to have to make a second trip if we don't have to. That person will then be in self-quarantine until they either get a negative test or they meet the CDC guidelines, which have to do with how many days you're without a fever and how many days you're without symptoms. We will immediately notify the City of Detroit Health Department, and we will also then start the process with the Health Department of identifying anybody who came in close contact with that person. They define close contact as being within 6 feet of somebody for 15 minutes or more. The way we've set up the school, we really shouldn't have anybody like that because nobody should be within 6 feet of anybody else for more than 15 minutes. So our hope is that we'll really minimize the contact tracing, but the health department at that point would also notify the family to find out who else you've been interacting with, right? Have you gone to work? Has your son gone to work or your daughter gone to work? Which brings me to a good point. We can control what happens in school, but we need all students and families to be really careful even outside of school. And then what we'll do, we'll notify all the parents in that building if we've had a case or a suspected case to let everybody know about that. And then we will shut down that classroom and go through a deep cleaning before we bring students and staff back into it. There are a few key questions that have come up. One question would be, if we start in person, is there a point at which we would go back to the remote learning, to the virtual learning? And the honest answer is I hope not, but yes, we would if we need to. And there are 3 circumstances that would lead to that. Number one, if there's a large spike in cases in Detroit. I showed you the graph showing that Detroit's doing much, much better. But if that changes and we see a large spike in the community, then we would talk to the health department and come to a decision as to whether or not we should consider going back to remote. Also, if we're seeing a rash of cases in any of our buildings, we might make that decision as well, regardless of what's happening in the community. And then lastly, of course, if the governor orders us to shut down, we will do so immediately. So all of those are potential scenarios. And as soon as we get things up and running, we'll be making sure that we have a contingency plan in place if and when that, for the eventuality of that happening. Another question that I think is fair to ask is, why are we starting now? There are some districts that have said they're going to go remote all year. That's a small number, but they're out there. There are other districts that won't make a decision until middle or late October. We're different than most schools. Most schools have 1,000 to 2,000 kids at the high school level. We're much smaller. That gives us the ability to put a much smaller number of students in a classroom and keep them about 6 feet apart. That's a big advantage for us. Also, our computer-based curriculum enables us to have students work on all their classes in one room, and it enables us to limit how many classrooms the teachers have to visit. Most students can get help by the teachers in their classroom only, or if they need extra help, it can be offered remotely or by a teacher from the room next door. It just gives us the freedom to make a fundamental change in how school operates. If you saw the picture of the high school in Spalding, Georgia, where they had a small outbreak, you saw that their hallways were packed with kids between classes. We've eliminated that. And so that, we feel, gives us an advantage. Another big reason to start now is that the warmer weather that comes with September and October means we can open the windows and run the fans. We feel that gives us our best chance at having really well ventilated rooms. Which leads me to the next point. And this is really the reason that I don't want to wait until November 1 or October 25th, is because when it gets colder, that's when the cold and flu come, and that's when we have to close the windows. I actually feel, and the committee that looked at this feels, we're much safer now. And if we are going to have a temporary shutdown in the winter, we'd like to get a couple months of school in, get the kids on track, so that it will be easier if they need to spend a few weeks at home in November or December. We'll have devices and they can work on them. But we think taking advantage of these next couple months is key to getting our students on track. While we certainly hope that a good number of our students can come back in person, we know that that may not always be an option for a lot of reasons. and we'll talk about those reasons here before we finish. But let me talk about first what that virtual option looks like. Students can do the curriculum and earn credit on any computer or tablet. If they're really good with the phone, they can do that, but it makes for a very small screen. We will have teachers and staff available to assist remotely. The student will need internet access. If you don't have internet access in your home, we will help you get it. And we'll have, as the school year goes on here, or as the next couple of weeks go on, we'll have instructions for that. They'll also need either a tablet or a Chromebook to complete their schoolwork. If you don't have one, we will help you get one. So we want to remove any obstacles to learning that you might have. So as I said, we'll provide internet or loan you a device if needed. If all else fails, we'll print off paper packet. We'd really like to keep everybody on the computer. That's the best way for the students to move ahead and for us to assist them, but we'll do whatever it takes to help them learn. If you're on the virtual option, the students will still be permitted to come into the school 1 or 2 days a week. Not required, but permitted. A few key issues that we learned from March through June. We learned a lot about remote learning and the virtual option and what works and what doesn't work. And also, there are some rules put in place by the state government this weekend. Number one, even if a student is working remotely, there must be regular communication with school staff, with a teacher or a mentor. We have to track that, and so that will be built in. So in the virtual option, students can do their work any time of the day. They can do it on the weekend, but at least twice per week, we'll have to have some communication between staff and students. Another thing that's very important, we're going to ask that all students work in both their classes on count day. Normally, we have them come in, and that's how the state determines our funding levels. Obviously, we can't have everybody come in the building on count day, but everybody can log in on count day, and we will really push for that. Some things that students and parents can do to help build for success with the virtual option is to set a regular study schedule. It could be at 11 o'clock at night, it could be at 4 o'clock in the morning, it could be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It doesn't matter when it is, it matters that it's a routine, a regular schedule. The students that didn't have a regular study schedule tended to really struggle this spring. I would bet that those who did better had more of a consistent study habit. I know it's hard to do when everybody's at home, but if you can get a designated study area, whether it's a basement or the dining room or a den or the front porch or the backyard, that's really helpful. An area with minimal disruption is a huge, huge factor in success. The students should plan on spending at least 20 hours per week on their studies. More is better, but if they can target for 20 hours per week, that will move them along in the curriculum very, very well. We will work with students and parents to monitor their progress and let you know how many hours of work they've done, how many courses they've completed. We need your help, especially if they're not in the building. We need the help of everybody at home, student and parents, to make sure that we've got kids moving in the right direction at the right speed. And at this point, I'd like to answer any questions that we have. I have a couple that were entered in advance, and I'll read those and answer them. And then if you would like, while I'm talking, feel free to enter at that link in the description of the event, and Ms. Duffy will bring those to me. So one question was, when does school start back? For Central and Southwest, that's September 8th. For East, we think that will be September 15th. Another question is, did school start back for other schools? The answer is mixed for that. Some schools are actually starting this coming Monday. Because of last spring, they want to get an early jump on things. A lot of schools are starting on Tuesday, September 8th. Some schools have said they will work remotely until mid to late October. So it's really a mixed bag, and it depends on each district and what's going on in their community. This question was a very important one. If school is to open up soon, why? Isn't it still too soon to do this? And then the person talked about the spread of the coronavirus. I think that's really the fundamental question that we've been grappling with all summer. And after reading a ton of articles and looking at all the things we could do, we actually feel we're safer to start now than we would be to start November 1. The only other option would be to go virtually for all year, but we hate to do that because we saw in the spring that that was a really tough thing for a lot of our kids. Not for all, but for a lot of them. But going back to that question, that's the reason we want to give families a choice. If a family just doesn't feel safe coming back, that's okay. They can go the virtual route, and then if a few months in they say, you know what, I think we're ready to try in person, then we can do it that way. And then the next question is, if school doesn't open right away, how long do you suppose it would take until it's logically safe? And I think that's the second big question. Right now, we think our safest bet is to take the measures that we've put into place and to start in early September. But if cases go up or if we get a state shutdown, then the question becomes, well, when do we start again? And that's really difficult to assess. It would really depend on one of two things. Either that we get the number of cases to be so low in the community that there's minimal risk of coming to school because so few people have the virus. We're not there yet, we're getting closer. The other would be that we get to the point where we have a vaccine. The only problem there is nobody knows when a vaccine will be ready. So my feeling is that this is the time to give it our best shot. If we can make it work, then we know we've got the right recipe and we go forward. If we have any struggles, this is the time to find out before we get to the cold and flu season. And I think that answered the next question. Ms. Duffy, do you have any other questions for me? Okay. All right, it sounds like those are all the questions we have for tonight. At this point then, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and joining this virtual town hall. If you think of additional questions, please reach out to your school and they will be happy to either answer them or they will get the answer for them. Thank you so much, and I wish everybody a safe and good night. We look forward to seeing students very, very soon. Bye now.